Hi everybody and welcome to First Chapter Friday. Today we are reading When the Tripods Came by John Christopher. This is a much older book. We've had this book in here for a long time, but it's been around even longer than we've had it in this library. So I was going to read the first chapter, but it's kind of cool. You can see up here that it's more of a, like, there's robots and there's science involved. So this is what we call a sci-fi book. And then we don't have many of those in this school, but we're going to go for the first sci-fi book we've ever read. Chapter 1. An explosion of noise woke me. It sounded as if a dozen express trains were about to hit the shed. I rolled over in my blanket, trying to get out of the way, and was aware of a blaze of orange lighting up boxes and bits of old farm equipment and tackle. An ancient, rusting tractor looked briefly like an overgrown insect. "What was that, Lori?" Andy asked. I could see him sitting up between me and the window. "I don't know." Both light and sound faded and died. A dog started barking, deep-throated, a Labrador maybe. I got up and walked to the window, banging my shin on something in the dark. It was dark outside, too. Moon and stars hidden by cloud. A light came in on the farmhouse, which was a couple of 100 meters away, just below the ridge. I said, "It's not raining, was it? Didn't someone at camp say something about an artillery range on the moor? Nowhere near here, though. Whatever they were firing could have gone astray." Rubbing my shin, I said, "It didn't sound like a shell, and a shell wouldn't produce fireworks like that. A rocket, maybe?" He yawned loudly. "It's all quiet now, anyway." "No sweat. Go to sleep. We've got a long trek in the morning." I stood by the window for a while. Eventually the light in the house went out. The farmer presumably took the same view as Andy. In the pitch black, I felt my way to the pile of straw which served as a bed. This was less fun than it had seemed the previous evening. There was a little protection from the hardness of each floor, and once awake I knew all about the aches in my muscles. Andy was already asleep. I blamed him for our being there, for volunteering us into the orienteering expedition in the first place, and then for insisting on a left fork which had taken us miles out of our way. It had looked as though we would have to spend the night on the moor. But we'd come across this isolated farm as dusk was thickening. The rules were not to ask for help, so we settled down in the shed. I thought my aches and resenting Andy would keep me awake, but I was dead tired. We had set out early from summer camp, and it had been a long day's slog. Drifting into sleep again, I was half aware of another explosion, but it was a distant one, and it wasn't too weary really to wake up to, and I was too weary really to wake up. I couldn't even be sure I wasn't dreaming. Andy woke me with the gray light of dawn filtering in. He said, "Listen." "What?" "Listen." I struggled for wakefulness. The noise was coming from the direction of the farmhouse, but further away, a succession of loud thumpings, heavy and mechanical. "Farm machinery?" I suggested. "I don't think so." Listening more carefully, I didn't either. The thumps came in intervals of a second or less, and they were getting nearer. There was even a sensation of the ground shaking under me. "Something's heading this way," Andy said. "Something big, by the sound of it." We crowded together at the small window of the shed. The sun hadn't risen, but to the east the farmhouse was outlined against a pearly sky. Smoke from a chimney rose almost straight. Farmers were early risers. It looked like a good day for the trek back to camp. Then I saw what was coming into view on the other side of the house. The top appeared first, an enormous gray-green hemispherical capsule, flat side down, which seemed to be floating ponderously in midair. But it wasn't floating. A weird, stilt-like leg moved in a vast arc across the sky and planted itself just to the right of the farmhouse. As it crashed down, a second leg appeared, passing over the house and landing between it and the shed. I could see a third leg, too, which it followed suit, would come to ground close to us, if not on top of us. But at that point it stopped. The gigantic object, more than 20 meters high, stood straddling the house. A band of bright green glassy panels ran horizontally, horizontally along the side of the capsule. It produced an effect that was a cross between multiple staring eyes and a grinning mouth. It wasn't a pleasant grin. "Someone's making a film." Andy's voice was unsteady. I turned to him, and he looked as scared as I felt. "That must be it. A science fiction movie." "So where are the cameras?" I felt my voice coming out wrong, too. "They probably have to get it into position first." I didn't know whether he believed it. I didn't. Something was moving beneath the capsule, curling and twisting and stretching out. It was like an elephant's trunk, or a snake, except it was silvery and metallic. It corkscrewed down towards the roof of the house and brushed lightly against it. Then it moved to the chimney stack and grasped it with a curling tip. Bricks sprayed like confetti, and we heard them crashing into the slates. I was shivering. Inside the house a woman screamed. A door at the back burst open, and a man in a shirt and trousers came out. He stared up at the machine looming above him and started running. Immediately a second tentacle uncurled, this time fast and purposeful. The tip caught him before he'd gone 10 meters, fastened round his waist, and plucked him from the ground. He was screaming, too, now. The tentacle lifted him up in front of the row of panels, and his screams turned to muffled groaning. After a few moments, the tentacle twisted back on itself. A lens-like opening appeared at the base of the capsule. It carried him towards it and thrust him through it. I thought of someone holding a morsel of food on a fork before popping it into his mouth, and felt sick. His groans ended as the tentacle withdrew, and the opening closed. A woman in the house had also become quiet, but the silence was even more frightening. Resting on its spindly legs, the machine had the look of an insect digesting its prey. I remember my glimpse of the derelict tractor in the night. This insect was as tall as King Kong. For what seemed a long time, nothing happened. No, the thing didn't stir, and there was no sound or movement from the house. All was still. Not even a bird chirped. The tentacle hovered in mid-air, motionless and rigid. When after a minute or so the tentacle did move, it raised itself higher, as though making a salute. For a second or two it hung in the air, before slamming down violently against the roof. Slates scattered, and rafters showed through the gaping hole. The woman started to shriek again. Methodically, the tentacle smashed the house and was methodically picked over the ruins like a scavenger going through a garbage can. The shrieking stopped, leaving the din of demolition. A second tentacle set to work alongside the first, and a third joined them. They probed deep into the rubble, lifting things up to the level of the panels. Most of what was picked up was dropped or tossed aside. Chairs, a sideboard, a double table, a bathtub dangling in the metal pipes from which it had been ripped. A few were taken inside. I noticed an electric kettle and a television set. At last it was over. The dust settled as the tentacles retracted under their capsule. "I think we ought to get away from here," Andy said. His voice was so low I could barely hear him. "How far do you think think it can see?" "I don't know, but if we dodge out quickly and get around the back—" I gripped his arm. Something was moving at the base of the rubble, and had been the farmhouse. A black dog wriggled free and started running across the farmyard. It covered about 10 meters before a tentacle arrowed toward it. The dog was lifted, howling, in the front of the panels and held there. I thought it was going to be taken inside, as the man had been. Instead, the tentacle flicked it away. Briefly, the dog was a black blur against the dawn light, then a crumpled, silent heap. The sick feeling was back, and one of my legs was trembling. I thought of my first sight of the Eiffel Tower, the summer my mom left and Isla came to live with us, and my panicky feeling over the way it stretched so far up into the sky. This was as if the Eiffel Tower had moved, had smashed a house to bits and swallowed up a man, tossed a dog to its death the way you might throw away an apple core. Time passed more draggingly than I ever remembered. I looked at my watch, and the display read 5:56. I looked again after what seemed like half an hour, and it said 5:58. The sky was getting lighter, and there was first a point of gold, then a silver, finally a disk of sun beyond the ruins of the house. I looked at my watch again. It was 6:07. Andy said, "Look!" The legs hadn't moved, but the capsule was tilting upwards and beginning a slow rotation. The row of panels was moving to the left. Soon we might be out of the field of vision and have a chance of sneaking away. But as the rotation continued, a second row of panels came into view. It could see all around. When it traversed 180 degrees, the rotation stopped. After that, nothing happened. The monster just stayed there, fixed, as leaden minutes crawled by. The first plane came over soon after 8. A fighter made 2 runs, east to west and then west to east at a lower level. The thing didn't move. A quarter of an hour later, a helicopter circled around, taking photographs, probably. It was nearly midday before the armored brigade arrived. Tanks and other tracked vehicles drew up onto open farmland, and in the bit of the farm lane in view, we could see an important-looking car and some trucks, including a TV van, all keeping a careful distance. After that, nothing happened for another long time. We learned later that this period in which our side was attempting to make radio contact, trying different frequencies without result. Andy got impatient and again suggested making a run for it, towards the tanks. I said, "The fact it hasn't moved doesn't mean it won't. Remember the dog?" "I do." "It might also decide to smash this hut. And if we run, and it starts something, and the army starts something back, we're likely to catch it from both sides." He reluctantly accepted that. "Why hasn't the army done something?" "Why do you think they ought to?" "Well, not just sit there. I suppose they don't want to rush things." I broke off as an engine started up, following a rumble of tracks. We ran to the window. A single tank was moving forward. It had a pole attached to its turret, and a white flag fluttering from the pole. The tank lurched across the field and stopped almost directly beneath the capsule. The engine switched off, and I heard a sparrow chirping out of the side of the shed. Then, unexpectedly, there was a burst of classical music. I asked, "Where's that coming from?" "From the tank, I think." "But why?" "Maybe they want to demonstrate we're civilized, not barbarians. It's that bit from Beethoven's symphony, isn't it? The one that's sung as a European anthem?" "That's crazy," I said. "I don't know." Andy pointed. "Look." The machine was showing signs of movement. Beneath the capsule, a tentacle uncurled. It extended down toward the tank and began waving gently. "What's it doing?" I asked. "Maybe it's keeping time?" The weird thing was, he was right. It was moving in a rhythm with music. A second tentacle emerged, dipped and brushed against the turret, as though he were getting the hang of things. The first tentacle started moving faster, in a more positive beat. The second felt its way around the tank from front to rear and made a second approach from the side. Moving over it and probing underneath, the tip dug down, rocking the tank slightly, and emerged to complete an embrace. The tank rocked more violently as it lifted. At first, just clear of the ground, then sharply upward. Abruptly, the music gave way to the stridence of the machine gun fire. Tracer bullets flamed against the sky. The tank rose in the tentacle's grip, until it was level with the panels. It hung there, spitting out sparks, but pointlessly. At the angle, the tracers were scouring empty sky. And they stopped abruptly as the tentacle tightened its grip, armor plate crumpled like tinfoil. For 2 or 3 seconds it squeezed the tank before uncurling and letting it drop. The tank fell like a stone, landing on its nose and balancing for an instant before toppling over. There was a furrow along the side where it had been compressed to less than half of its original width. Andy said, "That was a Challenger." He sounded shaken, but not as shaken as I felt. I could see the terrible careless squeeze. The tank dropped like toffee paper. When I looked out again, one of the tentacles had retracted, but the other was waving still, and still in rhythm it had picked up from the music. I wanted to run somewhere, anywhere, not caring what came next, but I couldn't move a muscle. I wondered if anyone in the tank had survived. I didn't see how they could have. Then, unexpectedly and shatteringly, there was a roar of an aircraft as the fighter bombers, which had been on standby, whooshed from the south, launching rockets as they came. Of the 6 they fired, 2 scored hits. I saw the long, spindly legs shatter, the capsule tilt away and tilt and sway and crash. It landed between the ruins of the farmhouse and the wrecked tank with an impact that shook the shed. I could hardly believe how quickly it was over, and how completely. But there was a capsule lying on its side with broken bits of legs sticking out. As we stared, a second wave of fighter bombers swooped in, pulverizing the remains. And that brings us to chapter 2. Ooh, that's fun. So this book is called When the Tripods Came, and this is available in our library, so if you are interested, come on by and grab it. Thanks so much.